It's Beatty. Today we're going to be talking about rest and what I think is best for rest compared to especially the older generation when it comes to rest. And also how we can look at strain and fatigue rate to see if we actually need rest. That's just like experimental though. But before I get into it, check out leviathansups.com for virility and vitality. Y'all should know what virility is. That is our seminal volume booster. So if you're trying to make a mess and or impress, that's probably what you want. Then we have vitality. Vitality is a testosterone booster, but unlike most testosterone boosters, it focuses on the stimulation and production of testosterone. Unlike most other testosterone boosters, it focuses on giving the building blocks for testosterone. So if you have a normal diet, a typical testosterone booster won't do much. Vitality makes your body produce more testosterone. So, and then finally, at peakmalephysique.com, you can get Beatty's Big Book of Length. Essentially, it's everything I learned about penis elongation. It now has all the pictures that I intended to go with the initial release. So, if you already bought the book, you've been emailed the newest update. And if you've been waiting for the pictures, well, here you are. So, now that paying the bills is out of the way, let's get on to the topic of today's video. So the importance of breaks. Now let's talk about the context of what the old heads used to do, and probably still do to a certain extent. A lot of their theories were based around engineering principles. And the issue with that is that we still need to worry about tissue performance while doing these exercises. This is why I take a physiotherapy approach to penis enlargement rather than the old methods that you would see, say, on Thunder's Place. So, under the ideals of strain and plastic fatigue, the more you stretch an object and the longer you hold it in this state, the more likely it is to stay in the stretched out, elongated state. So if you take a rubber band, hold it like this for say 2 hours, there's like a 90% chance it will never return to its normal, rigid, smaller state. But it will no longer be able to stretch as well. That's where the biologic perspective comes in. Penises and soft tissues in general heal. So if we heal, our baseline changes. So we don't need to put nearly as much strain or stress on the penis to get the same kind of results that you would get from typical plastic deformation from an inanimate object. On top of that, there is like actual evidence that stretching beyond a certain point damages the tissues, and the more often you stretch beyond this point, the more likely it is to cause severe injury and then fibrosis and plaque buildup. So we're trying to avoid that, and I talked about this a bit on my elongation video, but essentially going beyond 108% strain, meaning that you're 8% longer during your length sessions, is going to lead to more harm than good. So that's the premise of strain, at least. So that's the premise of strain, at least. What that means for taking breaks, since our tissues can heal, and since we are trying to avoid tissue fatigue long term, we need to take properly planned breaks to make sure that our tissues are healthy and spry, so that way it does not impact sexual performance, and that way we can avoid injuries long term. But there's a few more reasons why we need to take breaks. One, hormonal fatigue. There's like short-term hormonal fatigue and long-term hormonal fatigue. I don't know if I've been butchering saying hormones, but I'm just going to leave it in. So short-term, there's a study that shows skin collagen fibroblasts into assays. Assays are assays, just solutions of stuff to keep it alive. One was just soaked with transforming growth factor beta. I think it was transforming growth factor beta. Transforming growth factor is what causes collagens to grow and divide. Collagen fibroblasts. So the crazy part is that the one soaking in TGF transforming growth factor, grew half as fast as the one that was intermittently dosed with transforming growth factor. So if we're chronically stressing out the tissues, making it secrete transforming growth factor, we're actually going to grow half as fast compared to someone that does these rest break periods. That's just surface level theory. So we do not want to be at least doing all day stretching and extending for optimal growth based off of the research. And then if we look at it just from a more holistic perspective, I really don't like that word, but if we want to limit exposure as much as we can and still get the same growth, we just need to figure out what the turnover rate is for collagen fibroblasts for elongation or expansion training. From what I've seen, it's going to be about every 3 days. So every other day, potentially every 3 days, that's something I need to play around with, is going to be our frequency. Right now, I still recommend every other day, but some of you guys that are short on time, try every other 3 days. Let me know on r/getting bigger. Then we have strength adaptation. Strength adaptation happens no matter what, but we are trying to avoid as much of it as possible. Based off of Davis's law, that's the idea of soft tissue reformation, it takes 6 to 8 weeks for the strength adaptation to fully set in. So every 6 to 8 weeks, we should see a noticeable increase in the amount of work we need to apply to our penis to get it to stretch to the point we need to grow. Ideally, we cut the 6 to 8 week window as much as we can to stop the strength adaptation from happening. But even if this does happen, the cure for strength adaptation in our case is extended breaks. An Achilles tendon kept in basically a cast for 90 days, I believe, lost 68% of its strength adaptation. So if we take a 1 to 2 month break, we can extrapolate and assume that we'd lose about 50 to 60% of our strength adaptation to our penis, making it twice as easy to gain again. That's by just taking a month-long break. On top of that, the long-term hormonal fatigue, which I forgot to talk about at the beginning, is essentially since we are constantly secreting growth factors, whether it be intermittently or the entire time that we're wearing this extender, for example, our body adapts to this transforming growth factor. So it will take more and more transforming growth factors to keep up with a consistent rate of gain. And eventually it'll reach a point where the tissues can't produce enough transforming growth factor to meet the baseline requirements of transforming growth factor to gain, therefore stagnation. So, between strength adaptation, long-term hormonal adaptation, hormonal fatigue rather, we need to take extended breaks, probably every 6 months for about 3 weeks. And then we probably want to take a week off every 4 weeks to avoid the strength adaptation. Makes sense? Now, finally, with strain and fatigue rate, because this video kind of encompasses it, what's really cool about these numbers is we can tell when we need to take a break and how much work we need to do. So the easy one is strain rate. Strain rate is the length you are during your session. So when you're wearing your hanger or when you're in the extender, that is the strain rate. Strain rate is calculated by taking your during session length, dividing it by your pre-session length. So your pre-session stretch flaccid length. That number needs to be over 4 to 6%. Once you get to 4 to 6%, you only need to hold it for about 10 to 15 minutes afterwards to ensure the fatigue sets in. So then fatigue rate is what you are after a session. This is to show that we put fatigue onto the tissues. So on paper, you need to be 2 to 3% longer after your sessions. Now, let's explain why these numbers are what they are. So we have the stress strain curve. The normal working range of a collagen fibril is fully elongated, so that'd be our 0, and then 2% elongation, is going to be our working range. That's what it's going to typically handle without any fatigue. Moving up to 104% to 106%, this is where fatigue sets in. So we're not really damaging the tissues. However, it's not going to be able to crumple back up to its zero state. If we can do that enough times with enough collagen fibrils, we'll see 4 to 6% strain consistently. And that's when we need to take the device off, since the more work we do leads to micro tears and eventually full-on ruptures of the collagen fibroblasts. Then with fatigue rate, since the working range is 0 to 2% elongation or strain, we need to show that it's beyond the normal working range of fatigue, so we need to be beyond 2%. Going beyond 4% shows you have a lot of fatigue generated, or you have a lot of collagen that needs stretched out, and you need to actually get a proper measure of your pre-session size, and that more has to do with how tight your tunica is rather than your user error. So the crazy thing though with strain and fatigue rate is that with fatigue rate, we can tell that we have developed a lot of cumulative fatigue. So what would potentially happen is your pre-session length continuously gets longer, but your post-session length begins to stagnate. And that's a sign of cumulative fatigue. You can't stretch what's already been stretched out. And by week 3 to 4, it'll get very close to 2, if not below 2. 2%, that is. So if we take the 2% from the working range, we know that we're not outside of the working range anymore. We need to take a break to let these tissues heal up and get back to its normal state. So, and then you'll have a new zero state after the end of that week. With strain rate, your during session length, as soon as you get to 4 to 6% length, on paper, you only need to hold it for another 10 to 15 minutes to ensure proper fatigue. So that could be anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour and a half. If your sessions take longer than an hour though, you probably need a deconditioning break for the strength adaptation. So let's lay out one last time what my recommendations are. First, every other day. Some of you will be able to do your sessions 5 days a week. Some of you would only be able to handle 3 days a week. But for the most part, every other day is going to cover 90% of you guys. Every 4 weeks, take 1 week off. This is to avoid the strength adaptation and to overcome cumulative fatigue. Every 6 months, take 3 to 4 weeks off to drop the hormonal fatigue, or the long-term hormonal fatigue, and to lose a lot of strength adaptation that you potentially generated. A good session is always going to have 4 to 6% strain. Strain rate is how you define session success. So you take your after length, you take your during length divided by your pre-session stretch flaccid length. That needs to be over 4 to 6%. Hold it for 10 minutes. Once you hit that metric, you basically had an effective session, almost guaranteed. Then fatigue rate is how we measure fatigue. If that number ever drops below 2%, take a week break off. That is calculated by taking your after session length divided by your pre-session stretch flaccid length. Okay? I hope this cleared things up. I go into more detail in my book, and I go into more detail on my Reddit, and a bunch of videos here. So be sure to check them out. Peak Male Physique for penis enlargement equipment. Leviathan Sups for supplementation. Can't think. Peak Male Physique for my book. And I'll expect to have more for you guys soon. This is BD signing off.